She married 3 times. Each marriage was, in its own way, a different attempt at the same thing, the finding of a place in the world where she was wanted not as an image or a symbol or a surface but as herself, as the actual complicated human person she was underneath the performance. Each marriage failed in its own particular way. Each failure taught her something that she carried forward. And the 3 men, Jim Dougherty, Joe DiMaggio, Arthur Miller, represent, in a sense, 3 different visions of her, 3 different ideas of what Marilyn Monroe was and what she needed, and each was wrong in its own illuminating way. Jim Dougherty was first, and in some ways the simplest to understand, because their marriage was not really the product of romantic love between 2 people who had chosen each other but of a practical arrangement made by anxious adults who needed to find somewhere safe for a 16-year-old girl to be. He was 21. She was 15 going on 16. He was the neighbor's son, known in the neighborhood, known to Grace McKee Goddard who made the arrangement, considered steady and kind. He was steady and kind. That was real. He has spoken about her over the years with an enduring affection and a specific kind of wistfulness that is touching precisely because it is so uncomplicated. He loved the girl he married. He loved the normal girl in the small house in Van Nuys who made him dinner and had a dog and laughed at his jokes and seemed, for a while, to be becoming the person their ordinary domestic life required. He was not wrong about that girl. She existed. Norma Jean Dougherty was real as any version of her was, and the happiness of those early years, which she described, in later interviews, as genuine, as the first experience of stability she had known, was real. What he did not see, or saw, and did not know how to respond to, was everything else. The mind that was reaching past Van Nuys. The ambition that was not vanity but necessity. The deep, survival-level need to become something the world could not throw away. The fact that the girl he had married was not just a girl but a person in the middle of an enormous project, a project of self-creation that had been underway since she was 7 years old and that would not stop because she had found a kind young man and a house and a dog. He wanted her to stop becoming. He did not ask it of her cruelly or consciously. He simply wanted the life they had, and the life they had did not have room for what she was becoming, and she was going to become it regardless. The divorce was mutual, quiet, without hatred. He went on and had other relationships and another life and remained, all his years, the man who was married to Norma Jean before she was Marilyn Monroe, which is a particular place in history and seems to have sat on him neither too heavily nor too lightly. She carried something from that marriage that she did not always name. The experience of safety. Brief, real, insufficient, but real. She had been, for a few years, not afraid of being discarded. This was rarer in her life than it should have been. She remembered it. Joe DiMaggio is the marriage that still captures people, that still generates argument and emotion 60 years after both of them are dead. It is also the most genuinely complicated of the 3, the one in which the love was most real and the damage most severe and the tragedy most clear, because here were 2 people who genuinely, deeply loved each other and were, for a series of reasons having almost nothing to do with their love, incapable of being married to each other. He was, when they met, one of the most famous men in America. The Yankee Clipper. Baseball royalty. A physical legend. He had retired from baseball in 1951, already a myth, and was living in the particular way of legendary athletes who have left their sport. Slightly at loose ends, deeply attached to the world they came from, aware of the gap between who they were and who they are continuing to be in the public mind. He was deeply private, deeply Sicilian in his sense of family and honor and the proper behavior of wives, deeply uncomfortable with a certain kind of public spectacle. He was, in other words, almost certainly the wrong man for Marilyn Monroe to marry. They met in 1952, when she was 26 and he was 37. A mutual friend arranged it, as things were always arranged in Hollywood, through the invisible machinery of connection and interest and mutual benefit. He had seen her photograph and wanted to meet her. She had not particularly wanted to meet him. She was not especially interested in baseball, did not know much about him as a person, and was at this point in her career working very hard at being taken seriously and not entirely sure that being connected to a famous athlete would help that project. The meeting changed her mind. Or rather, he changed it. The actual person, in the actual room, turned out to be someone she had not expected. He was quiet. He was attentive. He was interested in her in a way that did not begin and end with the surface. He asked her questions and listened to her answers and seemed, with his dark Sicilian eyes, to see something in her that most people in her life were not bothering to look for. She fell for him. Hard, in the way she always fell for things, with the complete and somewhat terrifying investment of a person who has been deprived of something for so long that when it appears she cannot hold anything back. He was solid. He was present. He did not seem to need her to perform. In the early months of their courtship, in the restaurants and the drives along the California coast and the quiet evenings that he preferred and that she found, to her surprise, restorative. In those months she felt something close to what she had felt in the small house in Van Nuys, but deeper. More chosen. More real. They married on January 14, 1954. She wore a brown suit. The wedding was small, exactly the kind of wedding he wanted and she went along with, because she wanted what he represented and because, at this stage, she was still underestimating how different their ideas of life actually were. The marriage lasted 9 months. 9 months of increasing incompatibility, increasing pain, and, on his side, increasing attempts to manage and control a wife who was, by her very nature, unmanageable. He hated her work. He hated the way men looked at her. He hated the films she chose and the way she dressed and the fact that her career required her to be publicly available in ways that his sense of propriety found obscene. When she filmed the famous subway great scene for the 7-year itch in New York, he watched from the crowd and the watching destroyed something in him that did not rebuild. He was not abusive in the ways the word usually implies. He did not hit her, despite what some accounts have suggested. But he was controlling in the ways available to men of his generation and background. Cold silences, disapproval, the withdrawal of warmth as punishment, the steady communication that her authentic self was a problem requiring correction. She found this unbearable. She was 30 years old. She had spent her life being told that her authentic self was a problem. She was not going to accept it from her husband. The divorce was finalized in October of 1954. She said later it was the right decision. She said later many things about Joe DiMaggio that balanced genuine love against genuine recognition of the damage. She was right about both. What he felt about her never resolved into a tidy narrative. He sent roses to her grave, red roses, twice a week, for 20 years after her death, until he died himself in 1999. He never married again. He never gave interviews about her. He kept what he felt, kept it completely, in the way of a man who has learned that some things are too real to be turned into words. He loved her. She loved him. It was not enough, and it damaged her, and the damage was real. All of that is true simultaneously. Arthur Miller is the most intellectually fascinating of the 3 marriages, and in some ways the saddest, because it began as something so genuine, a meeting of 2 serious minds, a relationship built on the rarest of foundations, actual mutual respect for each other's intelligence, and became something so disappointing, so weighted down by the gap between what it promised and what it delivered. She met him in 1951, before she was fully Marilyn Monroe in the global sense, at a party in Hollywood that he attended reluctantly. He was already a major American playwright. Death of a Salesman had opened to rapturous reception in 1949, and he was in California with vague film-related business and no particular desire to attend parties. He went. She was there. He spoke to her. She said something that surprised him, something that indicated a mind he had not expected to find in that room at that party, and he found himself not wanting the conversation to end. She had read him. She had read Death of a Salesman and had thoughts about it, specific, considered thoughts about Willy Loman and the American dream and what the play was saying about the cost of performance, about the damage done by living exclusively for an external standard that can never be satisfied. The thoughts were, by any measure, good thoughts. He was surprised. He was not, in this, entirely unlike everyone else. The capacity to be surprised by Marilyn Monroe's mind was apparently unlimited. But unlike most people, he was surprised in a way that increased his interest rather than merely registering as an amusing anomaly. He was married. She was between relationships. They did not pursue anything at that first meeting, but something had started that did not stop entirely. They were in contact, irregularly, over the following years. When his marriage ended and her marriage to DiMaggio ended, the contact became more direct, and then serious, and then, after considerable difficulty on both sides, Given his public political situation in the McCarthy era and her studio obligations and the sheer practical complication of two very famous people trying to have a private relationship, they married on June 29, 1956. She had converted to Judaism for the wedding. This is mentioned in every account and usually treated as either touchingly sincere or slightly absurd, but what it actually tells you is something important about how seriously she took this marriage, how much she was reaching for permanence, for the kind of fully inhabited life that she had never had and that she believed this marriage could give her. She was not converting perfunctorily. She was converting as a declaration of intention. She wanted in. She wanted to belong to something fully. Miller wanted, in the beginning, what he found: the extraordinary, unexpected person, the mind behind the face, the woman who was so much more than the world thought she was. He found it, and he valued it, and for the first year or two of the marriage there were people who knew them both who said they had never seen either of them happier. Then the reality of living with Marilyn Monroe set in. Not the reality of her glamour or her fame or even her studio difficulties, though those were all present. The reality of her need. Her need for reassurance that was bottomless and exhausting. Her need for attention of a particular quality that he could not always provide. Her need to be the center of his world in ways that required him to stop being the center of his own, and a playwright who is not working is not a playwright but a person with a problem, and the problem complicated everything else. He wrote about her. He wrote about her in his diary, the diary that she found and read, and in which she discovered that he found her difficult, found her need exhausting, found the marriage not what he had hoped. She found this and it broke something. Not the marriage immediately, but the thing the marriage had been built on, the belief that he saw her truly, that his seeing was different from everyone else's seeing, that she was, with him, genuinely known. If he too found her exhausting, if the great mind also found the need too much, then where did that leave her? If even the people who loved her most authentically could not hold what she actually was, could not remain present to all of it without eventually pulling back, then what did that mean for the idea that she could be, somewhere, with someone, simply herself and simply enough? She bore this knowledge in the last years of their marriage and the years that followed. She bore it quietly, which was how she bore most things, and she did not stop reaching, which was also how she did most things. She did not become cynical about love. She did not stop wanting to be known. She simply added the knowledge of what she had learned to the weight she was already carrying. Miller wrote a film for her. The Misfits, in 1961, the last film she completed. He meant it as a tribute. She found it, reading the script, to be a portrait of herself that she did not fully recognize. A version of her filtered through his understanding, which was real but incomplete. The filming was difficult. Their marriage was effectively over during production. She was very unwell. He watched her suffering with the helplessness of a man who no longer had the purchase on her trust that would allow him to help. They divorced in January of 1961. 10 days later, John Kennedy was inaugurated as President of the United States. Whether she attended the inaugural balls, whether the relationship with Kennedy had already entered its complicated phase by then, these timelines blur and overlap in the way that the timelines of her life always blurred and overlapped, nothing clean, nothing sequential, everything present simultaneously. She never married again. She was 34 when she divorced Miller. She lived 2 more years. In those 2 years she had the relationship with Robert Kennedy that compounded everything. She had the firing from Fox. She had the planning of the press conference that was her final act of defiance. She had, her friends say, periods of real clarity, real happiness, real engagement with life that suggests someone who was not simply declining but was in the middle of something, in the middle of becoming something more fully herself than she had yet managed to be. She had, those who knew her say, started to understand something about the 3 marriages and what they meant. Not with bitterness. She was not, by temperament, a bitter person, which is remarkable given everything she had been through, but with a kind of clear-eyed compassion for all 4 of them, herself included. They had all been trying. They had all been limited. The trying was real even when the result was failure. What she wanted, she said to Dr. Greenson in one of their last sessions, was simple enough. To be known. To be loved for what she actually was, not for the surface, not for the image, not for what people needed her to be. To have a life in which she was a person first and a symbol second. She never had it. Not completely, not sustainably, not in the way she deserved. The 3 men who married her were not villains. They were limited, as people are limited, and what she needed was beyond the limits of what any of them could provide. What she needed was a world that had been built to see her clearly. And that world did not exist. She spent her whole life trying to build it, one person at a time, one relationship at a time, one marriage at a time. She deserved to succeed. Joe DiMaggio came to her funeral. He organized it, kept it small, kept the Hollywood crowd away, kept the ceremony as close to private as anything in Marilyn Monroe's life could be. He stood at her graveside in the August heat of 1962 and wept openly, which was not the kind of thing men of his background and generation did in public, and he did not care. He said, to the coffin, things that no one else was close enough to hear. Arthur Miller did not attend the funeral. He said, asked about it later, that he felt his presence would be intrusive, that the ceremony should belong to the people who had been most recently in her life. There is another reading of this, one that does not entirely reflect well on him, but the other reading is not the whole story either. He grieved. His grief was private and complicated in the way of grief about relationships that ended badly and people who died before the complications could resolve. Jim Dougherty read about her death in the newspaper, like everyone else. He cried in private. He remembered the girl in the overalls at the factory, and the small house in Van Nuys, and the collie dog, and the girl who laughed easily and who had, even then, that quality of paying complete attention to whoever was in front of her. He had not seen her in years. He thought about her for the rest of his life. 3 men. 3 marriages. 3 different failures to fully hold what she was. None of them monsters. None of them adequate, in the end, to what she needed. She was larger than any of them knew how to love. She was larger than the world, in 1962, knew how to hold. And so the world held the image and lost the person, and the image has lasted 60 years, and somewhere underneath it the person is still there, waiting for us to be finally, fully equal to seeing her. We are getting there. Slowly, imperfectly, with the accumulated weight of 60 years of better understanding of what she endured and what she was. We are getting there. She would have wanted us to hurry. There is one more thing worth saying about these 3 marriages, something that the biographical record tends to treat as background, but that seems, on reflection, to be rather central. In all 3 marriages, in different ways, Marilyn Monroe was the one who saw most clearly. She saw Jim Dougherty's kindness and its limits. She saw Joe DiMaggio's love and his inability to accept what she was. She saw Arthur Miller's brilliance and his failure to ultimately extend it to her in the way she needed. She saw all of it, she was always seeing, and she stayed as long as staying made sense and left when it didn't, and she grieved what she left and carried it forward and tried again. The seeing clearly, the continuous unflinching assessment of reality even when reality was painful. This is not the quality that is usually assigned to Marilyn Monroe. The qualities assigned to her are beauty and vulnerability and a quality of yearning that the world found irresistible. But underneath the yearning was a very sharp mind that was paying very close attention and drawing conclusions. She was not fooled by any of her marriages longer than she needed to be. She was not fooled by Hollywood. She was not fooled by the Kennedys. She was not fooled, finally, by the idea that being quiet would keep her safe. She saw everything. She always had. The little girl in the orphanage who kept the grief quiet while watching everything had grown into a woman who kept the seeing quiet while the world watched her. And in the end, what she had seen was too much to keep quiet anymore. That is why there was a red notebook. That is why there was a press conference scheduled. That is why, perhaps, there was no August 6th. 3 marriages. 3 men who loved her imperfectly. And 1 woman who saw them all clearly, who loved back with everything she had, and who deserved, at the absolute minimum, to be equally seen.